Well, good morning. It's the fourth Friday of the month at 11 a.m. It must be time for the Digital Learning Webinar. Welcome. My name is Jim Pazinski. I'm the Vice President for Digital Learning, and we're very pleased that you're able to join us today. This is one of the more fun things I do. Working with John and others, we're able to decide on what happens at this webinar, and so we get to hear lots of interesting folks. So I hope that's why you're joining us today, because we have some very good presentations. So I want to give some real quick announcements. The first one being is that the Digital Learning Symposium is coming up at the end of March, and next week you'll have 2 weeks left before the early bird registration ends on February 7th, as well as that's the date for proposals for the symposium. So 2 weeks from today. If on Valentine's Day you're having a candlelight dinner looking across at your loved ones, you don't want to have to plant your face and say, oh, I forgot to register. Oh, I forgot to put a proposal in. So get those proposals in, register for the symposium, because it's going to be a great time. We've got some really great people lined up already, and it's almost full. So there's about 2 more weeks that you should do that. So the next thing I'd like to mention real briefly is the fact that next week, we're going to have a meeting here with Microsoft and LinkedIn. One of the things my office tries to do is establish relationships with various providers around the world. And Microsoft and LinkedIn are working on a special project to utilize LinkedIn data and Office 365 in order to enhance the career services experience of students, where they can pull in mentors as well as help them get real-time data about jobs and job experiences and what they need to do to make their resume more enticing to employers. And so they're doing what is called a private preview, which is kind of like a very mature beta, and they've invited us to participate in that. So we're having a meeting next Thursday here at the system office in order to allow them time to present what this is about, what our responsibilities would be, and then allow us time to ask questions. Now, I have already invited all of our institutions to participate in this meeting. I have, from the provosts, a main digital learning contact at each of the institutions, and I've reached out to that person and see if they want to attend that meeting. Most of them have responded either yay or nay, but I did want to announce this to you all because if you think that there should be real interest on your campus about this, go ahead and reach out to me, and I'll let you know if we already have a representative from your campus or whether or not we still need to do that. Space is limited because we're only using one of the small boardrooms here at the system office for this series of presentations. But go ahead and reach out to me if that's something that might be of interest to you. So next, what I'd like to talk about is the fact that also on the digital learning website, and that's dli.northcarolina.edu, in addition to an announcement about this project with Microsoft and LinkedIn, are the future webinars. So you can plan your fourth Friday of the month at 11 a.m. to attend those. We have some folks coming in February. One is a professor over at the School of Education at UNC Chapel Hill, as well as a representative of Acrobatic. And then in March, we have some colleagues from Titan Partners who will be talking with us. Now, I would use this as an opportunity also to mention that there's so many great things happening across the system. And so we'd really like it if more of you will give us a call, myself, John, and say, hey, here's some things I want to talk about. And it could be for 10 minutes, it could be for 20 minutes, but really share with your colleagues some of the best practices that are happening across the university. So next, before we begin the presentation, just want to kind of give you an overview here. We have Dr. Casey Green, who I've known for very many years, who does the Campus Computing Project, which is at over 30 years, the longest continuously running IT project looking at American IT in colleges and universities. I have utilized this as a resource for, again, the last 30 years. It always has been a go-to for me and many of my colleagues to really understand where IT is going in higher education. And Casey does this wonderful presentation at EDUCAUSE that is honestly standing room only. So he's agreed to come and give us not a rundown on the survey, but rather a deeper conversation on some of the elements of that. We'll be getting to that in just a minute. And then we have Colin Helen, who is with Realize It as a principal researcher, and he'll be talking about adaptive courseware and how students behave in adaptive courseware. Adaptive courseware is an area that I've been very, very interested in for the last 3 or 4 years. We did a big study of it when I was at the Gates Foundation. We did an investment in it. And although I don't think it's taken off nearly as much as it should, it has a great deal of potential. So you'll see as a recurring theme, I think, in our webinars, various aspects of adaptive courseware that we'll want to drill down on and really understand this area better. So with that, the next slide, and then we're gonna start first with Casey. So I'm gonna turn it over to Casey. It's gonna be a little bit interactive. I'll ask some questions once in a while, but Casey is such a pro at this. I'll ask him to lead off. Casey Green.
Jim, good morning. Thank you for those very kind words, and my thanks to all of you for giving up part of your Friday morning for this webinar and to hear a little bit about a conversation about what the technology touches. That phrase actually was the closing comment in an Inside Higher Ed article about the 2019 campus computing survey. The reporter quoted me saying, it's not about the technology, it's the impact of what the technology touches. And that's where I'd like to focus, not so much a presentation, but a conversation with Jim. By the way, I know that the pressing question for all of you, as soon as this title slide came up, is can we get the slides? They have been posted, or they will be posted along with some supplemental material on the DLI webpage. First question is, what have we learned? I'm old enough to remember when I got my first IBM PC and Mac. That was a long time ago, 1982. Some of you may have had that experience. Others of you have come into this along the way. It's my assessment as we now enter what I would characterize as the 5th decade of the so-called technology revolution in higher education that began with the arrival of Macs and PCs in 1982 and 1984 on college campuses, and also in the consumer and corporate markets, that in many ways, the more things change, the more they stay the same. This is an old French expression that I recall from my high school French years ago. It's also the title of an article from the EDUCAUSE Review that's part of the packet. In other words, that while many things have changed dramatically for us in our conversation about technology on campus in terms of what goes on in classrooms, over the air, online learning, administrative resources and services, in many ways, a lot of things remain the same. So we have experienced, without question, great technological change. You think about the hardware, software, wireless internet, all this stuff. The first Macs and PCs came out, I think, the first PC came out with 64K of memory, and Bill Gates was infamously quoted shortly afterwards, why would anybody ever need more than 128K of memory on a PC? Of course, today, many of us have 8 and 16 megabytes or more. We think about the storage on these things, the software we use, the arrival of the internet, and particularly what Tom Friedman called the Netscape moment in 1995 with the arrival of Netscape and browsers, wireless mobile. All this stuff is tremendous technological change, both on campus and off. And at the same time, we have in higher ed experienced continuing issues that haven't changed. Some of that is managing our great expectations for what technology might be. We continue to confront, according to my survey data and my campus conversations, significant challenges when it comes to youth training and user support for both faculty, students, administrators, and staff. We continue to struggle with what I would characterize as the issue of instructional integration, which consistently is ranked by IT officers as one of the continuing challenges confronted, pressing challenges confronted. How do we do this stuff effectively in instruction, broadly defined, in classrooms, hybrid, and online? We have a huge issue with evidence of impact. I'll talk a little bit more about this as we go forward. We don't do a good job of evaluating what we do. We still do a lot of stuff with epiphany and opinion as opposed to evidence. I've been arguing that we need to pay more attention to recognition and reward for faculty about their efforts about going digital, not that you get points for using an LMS or posting your syllabus on the web, but for those who say this is part of my scholarly portfolio, let's look at that and give them recognition and reward for those efforts. And finally, we are consistently underfunded. And that's certainly been the case as we look at what's happened over the last 10 years, going into and coming out of the Great Recession. Many campuses are still playing catch up. And finally, on this last slide, if we can bring up the latency issue. The reality is that the key technology issues, as I said earlier, are not about technology, it's about everything that technology touches. Jim, let me stop there and you can begin the inquisition.
Thank you, Casey. So, one of the things you and I have chatted about a number of times over the last, 20, 30 years is the slow pace of change, the slow pace of impact. Many years ago, I remember us having a conversation and I said to you, and you pushed back, that, we've got all this technology today, and maybe this was in the 90s or early 2000s, but, things really haven't changed that much. And you appropriately pushed back. And I think today, there has been a tremendous amount of change. I mean, the things that are, the information on our fingertips and whatnot. But I guess I'm still concerned that in our classrooms, across the corpus of all of our classrooms, you do have some classrooms that are really, really high tech. And I'm not talking about the gizmos in the room, but the faculty utilization of technology. But in most of our classes, technology is kind of a bolt-on rather than from the ground up born digital. And do you see that changing, or what do you think is going to need to happen in order to make that change so it's much more integral as we build our courses versus at the end?
No, Jim, I think that's a very valid point, that there's still a lot of bolting on as opposed to baking in. And I think where this has been highlighted recently, not just in terms of on-campus and hybrid classes, but particularly online, where so much of the even continuing effort today is how do we port as opposed to how do we do significant redesign, and to leverage the kinds of resources that are available to us to both bring content and engage students and make it more interactive to capture the attention of our students. And I'm on record in a piece I wrote for my digital tweet blog a couple of years ago, that there's a lot of what I would characterize as semantic remorse about learning management systems. And what I meant by that is, if you think about the evolution of these things, which are now 2 decades old, the first of them began to emerge in around 1998, 1999. Originally, they were called course management systems, then they became learning management systems, because CMS also became an acronym for content management systems. And it was on the faculty side that acronym or that label emerged, helping faculty manage content. I think what we're really hoping for, and we still struggle with, is what we're looking for: student engagement platforms. What's the platform that will make this stuff sticky for our students? Because we know that learning is enhanced when students spend more time on task. And how do we do that? And it's still the case that there's a lot of baking in bolting on as opposed to baking in. I think that that's a slow curve. Some of that is as younger faculty come in and do some course redesign, new tools come in. But the other thing I would point to on the slide in front of us, if you look at the 2 center boxes, change versus continuing issues, the blue box is really about infrastructure. The technological change is the stuff that sits on top of the infrastructure. And by infrastructure, I don't mean the concrete and the pipes and the wires, but it's the other part of the infrastructure. Yeah, hardware and software is part of the infrastructure, but expectations, particularly training and user support, the commitment to evaluation. So we try to do better, recognize what we're doing well and how do we do better. Recognition and reward for faculty. Those are, to me, are part of an expansive and critical definition of infrastructure that we also have to address in this process of baking in as opposed to bolting on.
So let me stop you there and ask a question. So along those things in the blue box, the training, user support, evidence of impact, the recognition and rewards, the average rank and file faculty member and even digital technologist or DL center director really can't do much about that. I know that you were heavily involved and drove a Gates grant a couple of years that looked at how we could help provosts think about these issues. Based on that experience, do you think that's where the fulcrum is, or are there other avenues to get some real traction on these issues?
Jim, I think there are a couple of fulcrums for this. We've been surveying this item on the campus computing survey for 20 years. Does your campus recognize and reward? And even at campuses with a teaching mission, it's barely 20% that have expanded the algorithm for faculty members. And what I'm struck with is sort of the duality of this, in the sense that we talk at a top level about we want to support faculty, but ultimately it is the leadership and it's the behaviors of department chairs and senior faculty at the departmental level, as well as provosts, that will change this and provide for that expansive algorithm. There were campuses in what was called the Digital Fellows Initiative, sponsored generously by the Gates Foundation. There were 31 campuses involved with that, including the UNC system office and one of the UNC campuses, where in fact that conversation was underway and slowly changing, where provosts went public and said, yes, we can and will do this to expand the algorithm. And that makes a difference. It's an important message, particularly for younger faculty who often bear the brunt of this in terms of the expectation you will be the technological change maker, or who are told, don't do anything other than follow the straight linear path to get tenure, and then you can start messing with this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Should we move on?
Yeah, go ahead and move on. I'll just say to the audience, I see where we're starting to get some things in the chat, some questions. We're going to hold questions until the end, and then we'll give Casey an opportunity to answer those. Go ahead, Casey.
Following on then, so the question becomes, what have we done well and what have we done better? Let me bring up both the next box as well. Without question, the hardware, and some of that, it comes certainly has its origins in the research labs and universities, has gotten amazing. If you think about the kind of power in your phone compared to what you might have had on your first PC. And the content is outrageously wonderful today. The fact that students in North Carolina or any place else have access to libraries and resources and databases that are not just static, but interactive from across the world. I remember my first stat class as an undergraduate in 1970. We didn't do any stat, we did theories and proofs because we couldn't afford computer time for us. Today, you can pour large databases about healthcare in North Carolina, or educational attainment, or employment records from different counties in North Carolina or nationwide in an Excel sheet, and students can see the interaction of these different variables. That's phenomenal. The things, to me, again, it comes back to the do better continuing challenge. A sustainable infrastructure. Some of that is financing. It's still the case from our survey data that many campuses continue to experience mid-year and annual budget cuts. There's no let up in demand. In fact, demand is rising for resources and services and budget. Many campuses, particularly public fours and community colleges, continue to experience budget cuts, and that's a compounding problem because you take it back and you take it back again over time. Excuse me. We do a terrible job, let us be candid, about assessment and evaluation. Whether it's pilot projects or major initiatives, we say we're going to do all that, we're going to go forward with change, and we never make the effort. In many instances, not all, and I'm not necessarily speaking explicitly about anything at North Carolina, I want to be very clear about this, but what I've seen over the past 30 years, we do a terrible job of assessing and evaluating these initiatives in terms of going forward. What have we learned and how do we do better? And also then, what's the impact on learning? Often, again, it's very ad hoc, as opposed to going back to the prior conversation. We should not bolt on assessment and evaluation in our efforts in studying impact. It needs to be baked in from the beginning of these.
Absolutely. I wouldn't disagree with you. I would ask you to comment on how about scalability along with sustainability, scalability. I see, so much of what we do in higher ed as a pilot, and it never scales to, the broader university, or it doesn't scale into the future. We've done that. It really went well. We've evaluated, but then, the grant runs out and nothing happens to it. So any kind of advice on scaling and sustaining these things?
Well, I think that the pilots that begin with the intent to scale should be explicit about that from the beginning. I mean, this is not unique to what we do in technology. It's unique to a lot of federal initiatives that are programmatic in terms of revising curriculum in STEM areas and everything else. It should not be a one and done, but part of the plan going forward is, if we're successful, if we have some amount of success, what is up front our plan or the prospects for scaling this, as opposed to, how are we going to scramble when it's done to kind of do that? Mm-hmm. And that's not unique to institutions. That's also true about foundations. I've been involved with foundation projects where the initiative for a year or two has had tremendous success. And yet it is kind of withered because the foundation has said, okay, well, we're kind of one and done on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that, over the last 30 years, just a soundbite from the Inside Higher Ed, just affirming this issue about analytics as part of this as well. Our survey data consistently from campus computing, our analytics investments have fallen short of expectations. And we saw this again this week. Inside Higher Ed issued their annual survey of CAOs. Barely 30, I think it was 23% of provosts said only 23% of provosts said we do a very good job of using data for planning and decision making. That number is actually down from 31% from the 2012 Inside Higher Ed CAO survey, and I co-authored that survey and managed that survey project. We're experiencing a lot of what I would characterize as analytic angst. We'll talk about that again. So let's talk about adaption. It began with the arrival of the IBM PCs, and we went through, all these images on the right side of your screen reflect sort of different milestones in terms of the technologies that we use from that first IBM PC or the Mac, a compact, luggable Netscape 1995, the emergence of Amazon, tablets and phones, students in labs and clusters and classrooms. Many of you are familiar with Ev Rogers' diffusion curve about how this happens, which has certainly guided a lot and helped me understand a lot of things in terms of the work that I do. There's also the Gartner hype curve about the elevated expectations, trough of disappointment, and how this moves forward. And just sort of let me add to that as well. What I've seen has been the 4 C's as I think about the technology that I've seen in my life, both personally and professionally. Something emerges and it's cute. So think back, if you are of an age, the arrival of the first PCs, they were cute. Oh, look what we can do on these things. And user-friendly DOS, which were not all that user-friendly or insanely great maths, they still did it. But these things were cute and they provided a level of independence that many folks didn't have when they were in the computer center. Then let's go on to the next one. And then they became incredibly convenient. I know as a younger faculty member, when I got my first PC, it allowed me in one sense to cut the cord and gave me an incredible amount of independence for my writing. I didn't have to wait for days for campus. I have access, but the senior faculty I work with had access to the steno pool and the typing pool. The folks just constantly were doing things on IBM Selectrix. Also became convenient because graphics software emerged. We got rid of some of us are dating ourselves in terms of using graph paper and India ink. And we could do and we plot graphs.
Don't forget those quill pens.
Pardon?
Don't forget those quill pens.
Quill pens as well. Then it became convenience. Boy, this saves me time. It gives me a lot of, it became compelling in terms of not just what we were doing on campus. Look at how I can do this. I can go back and edit. I don't have to go back and, again, dealing with paper on a typewriter, but I can go into the paragraph. I can write and rewrite. And we all know that good writing is consistent focus on rewriting in many ways. And then ultimately became compulsory in many instances. If you think about many things that we do on campus, online registration now, or for those of you who have been buying airline tickets for 15 or 20 years, it's almost compulsory that you go online. In terms of buying an airline ticket, you're going to pay more money for that if you have to call. You'll get better information if you buy online, an airline ticket or other kinds of services. And again, you think about Amazon and the convenience of Amazon, but again, admittedly, consequences for that in terms of what that's done to certain retail and what many are calling the challenge or demise of traditional retail in the malls. There is this kind of 4C cycle that we've experienced, not just on campus, but also in consumer and corporate markets. Let's move on about evaluation. This comes from the 2009 Campus Computing Survey. John, go ahead and click. Our survey data, this is, again, some 250 campuses this year, CIOs. My campus has a formal program to assess the impact. 1 in 8, and that's down 4 percentage points from 2008. This number fluctuates. It's barely over 15, 16%. And in contrast, if you look at the second block here, we say, well, what do CIOs say is very important? Yeah, it's important that we assess the benefits. It's important that we look for the ROI. It's important that we survey students and faculty. Those numbers went down again. And the essence of doing better is knowing what you've done. We don't do this. We don't make these investments from the beginning. We don't bake it in. We try to bolt it on. Bolting it on is not successful because we haven't designed it in. Same thing in terms of designing the scalability issues that Jim asked about when we were talking a few moments ago. This is a consistent and problem and challenge in terms of our initiatives. What difference does this stuff make? And particularly, I think when we talk about the learning experience, Faculty want a compelling reason to change. For those of you who are faculty members, as you think about the conversations you might have had, if you are one of those technology evangelists or advocates, and you say, well, I've seen the benefits it brings to my students, you have a conversation with one of your colleagues, maybe a little skeptical, show me the evidence. Show me the evidence about how this has enabled your teaching. What has this done in terms of the learning experience and outcome of your students? And we just don't do that. And again, survey data going back from my work and from others, we don't evaluate, and the question is why not? And particularly in light of what's emerged over the last decade in terms of significant investment in analytics on campuses across the country. If it is important, if IT leadership and others saying it's very important, why aren't we doing this? And again, we saw the data from CAOs this week from Inside Higher Ed. Only 23% say their campuses do a very good job of using data to aid in informed decision making. Analytic angst is the best way we can do this. This again from the CERT Campus Computing Survey. IT officers in our survey say it's the number one top priority over the next 2 to 3 years, confirmed by 60%. And again, only 22% of IT officers rate the investment in analytics as very effective. We're not delivering on this at most instances. There are some outliers, to be sure. Many of you know the story. You'll hear in a moment about Georgia State. I'll come back to that in a moment. The key issue for me is that we need to use data as a resource, not as a weapon. For too often, when we've used data, it's been as a weapon to penalize our colleagues, as opposed to focus on what you've done wrong is how do we do better. We need to change the data culture in higher education. I think this is the last slide. And for years, I've argued for what I've characterized, it's not technology versus high touch. Many of us of a particular age think about our relationship with faculty that was high touch as opposed to high tech. In fact, the best implementations of technology are tech-enabled high touch. 3 examples, the baristas, Backs for Baristas at Arizona State. They may have a great online program. They have incredible user support. Eliminating the graduation gap at Georgia State in academic light speed. Georgia State, through a massive commitment of analytics, but support services, eliminated the graduation gaps between various student populations. The top level was they made an incredible investment in analytics. The backstory when you talk to the folks there is we hired 170 people to answer the day after problem. That once Casey Green gets the email saying, Casey, we've monitored what you're doing, you're going into a rabbit hole from which you may have a problem getting out in your widgets class. Here's where you go to get support to get out of that. And the Math Accelerator at Austin Community Colleges, putting students on the floor using adaptive technology from McGraw, and faculty walking on the floor as opposed to standing in front of the whiteboard. These are classic and critical examples of what I've characterized over the last 2 decades as tech-enabled high touch. It's not one or the other, but it's the added value of both. It's the gestalt. Jim?
On especially the 2 collegiate examples on the left, ASU and Georgia State, a lot has been written up about those and how successful they have been. What's your take on why that hasn't inspired more institutions to adopt some of those things that they're doing?
Well, Jim, I think it has informed many institutions. I agree with you. It may not help many institutions get to the cup to the lip point. Yeah, we know we need to do this. It may be a budgeting, maybe a resource. It may be any one of a number of issues in terms of the planning and policy parts to say, okay, we can do A, but we can't fully do B. But I think there's growing recognition about the critical role of support services. We see this, obviously in student success initiatives. My friend and colleague, many of you know John Gardner. John, for example, talks about gateway courses as the Bermuda Triangle of higher education, because students go in there and many of them never return. And if you use the quote, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome, that's what we do. We tell a student who doesn't get through a gateway course, take it again with no change in the course, just assuming that by doing it over, that's going to change the student outcome, and it won't. We have to really engage in thoughtful course design, baking in what we've learned as opposed to bolting on minimal remedies and resources.
And I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that I think that I differentiate between innovation and then having to do something. I think these schools have been innovative. They didn't necessarily have to do and try these things. And of course, some of the initiatives they tried also failed. But I think that many institutions, and I'm not picking on ours, but rather the corpus of the 4,300 across the U.S., is that it's only until it becomes, a critical issue when it's almost they're in a death spiral, do they really try dramatically new and different things? And I just wish we would be able to back up a bit and do some of that innovation so we have that built when we really, really need it versus when we're in desperate straits.
Well, Jim, if I may, just very quickly, I know we're at the edge of time. I think in many instances, the question is, what difference will the innovation make? What difference will the investment make? I'm very mindful of a conversation I had at EDUCAUSE with an IT officer at a campus that was experiencing significant financial challenges. And the pressure from the administration, he said in a very public forum, is we're going to cut user support services. And my response is, all that's going to do is accelerate your death spiral. Because word's going to get out, you're not providing support for faculty and students. You know, if anything, you want to increase those resources because that's going to counter the spiral.
Right.
If you think about student retention and academic performance issues. And word will go out, because it's a neural network, that Acme College has made this investment and is doing better. Just very quickly, 40 years ago in my first graduate seminar in public policy, the prof came in, slammed the books down on the desk and said, implementation is the movement of cup to lip. I think that's part of the challenge that we confront in terms of what you asked, why don't we do this? Well, we know what we ought to do. The question is getting there, and some of the challenges, whether it's financial, operational, cultural, or anything else, about moving that cup to lip, Jim.
Okay, thank you for that. So let's, if you don't mind, Casey, let's take a
No, we're done. This is the last slide. The other one is just shameless self-promotion.
Well, we'll take a couple quick questions before taking it over to Colin. Connie asks, any instructional applications that faculty use with success for baking in, your earlier comment? Anything?
Sure. So I think that there has been some effort, not uniform, across the landscape. I don't want to talk about a particular product because a lot of this varies dramatically on the part of some of the adaptive software platforms to bake in as opposed to bolt on. Essentially, in some cases, stuff just gets poured in. In other instances, has been an effort. There are, I think, a number of efforts underway in online programs to really do major course redesign. There's a wonderful article that appeared in the New Yorker some year in the early days of the MOOCs about Online U that talked about the effort at Harvard. And I realize Harvard is an outlier at EDX about how they were doing significant course redesign. And again, Harvard is an outlier. Harvard is not like the rest of us, and EDX isn't like the rest of us that would have the kind of resources with instructional designers and others. At the other end, let me cite Austin Community College, one of the colleges that was part of the Digital Fellows Program. Austin created its own version of a Digital Fellows Program to provide courseware grants for faculty at the college. And from day one, when they announced those awards, there was a public ceremony where that faculty member was introduced to the courseware designer that would work with him or her from day one, as opposed to 3 weeks or 6 weeks or 10 weeks into saying, oh, now go find somebody to help you do the redesign. But that, to me, was a critical and important substantive and symbolic example of saying, okay, if we're going to do this, we're going to bring the faculty with content and pedagogical expertise and the instructional technology folks who have all these other skills together to create that gestalt where the sum is more than the parts as we go forward with courseware design.
Excellent.
It can be done.
Okay. One last question. It's a long one. I'm going to read it, and then you're going to give a short answer. We know people who do engage online. They use social media avenues to build community. In academia, we're bound by FERPA. This means that inherently we're unable to bake into existing engagement tools, example, Snapchat, Twitter. What we can do is bolt on specialized, isolated lockdown solutions. What do you think are some of the options and coming options for integrating the educational experience into our students' lives instead of adding one more tool to manage?
Yeah, so good question, one that we've grappled with for a long time. It is the case that the LMS providers broadly defined, I don't want to cite or ding any one particular platform, have tried to do some of this with chat functions. It's been, in some cases it works, some cases it doesn't. But I think, part whether it works in the context of the LMS, if you accept that as de facto a widely used platform for pushing content and resources out to students, some of that's also the culture. On the other hand, students are voting not so much with their feet, but with their fingers in terms of which of the platforms they prefer, and telling us, well, I'm here, you should come to me. And I think this is the larger challenge we confront in higher ed. So much of the student experience, whether students are 18 or 36 or 45, is that expectation is fostered by their off-campus experience with consumer and corporate products, and they come to campus and say, why can't I do this? I don't have an easy answer for that. I think it's going to be it will be a continuing challenge. Maybe part of it is that for faculty members to say, look, I know you have these resources over here. These are some of the restrictions we have. We're going to try to do the best we can with analog things within the constraints of the environment we have. Maybe the best. I'm sorry, that's the best I can offer at this point.
We very much appreciate that, Casey. Well, if we have some time after column, we may bring you back for some additional questions. And there's such a richness here, we may bring you back for another session too. But thank you so much for your time today.
And my thanks to you and to your colleagues at the UNC campus and the UNC system.
Thank you. So Colin, we're going to turn it over to you now.
Thanks, guys. And thank you, everybody, for coming along today and listening to me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how students behave in personalized adaptive courses. I'm going to show you kind of some animations, replay some courses so you can see this actually happening yourselves. All the work I'm going to present here is part of this ongoing collaboration between Chuck Dubin and Patsy Moskal at the University of Central Florida, myself, I realize it, and Connie Johnson at the Colorado Technical University. So we're a pretty different group, very different institutions. You have, University of Central Florida. They're so big, and traditional kind of style university. You have Colorado Technical, which is predominantly online, serving, it's a for-profit, serving older populations. And then we have us, which is the common platform across both institutions. Together, we try to research different aspects of adaptive learning, what kind of impact it has on the students, its effectiveness, is there differences between how it's used in different scenarios, and really try to kind of get a grips on how best to use the technology to give the students the best opportunities and the best chance of success. So, like I said, we've studied a lot of pieces, and today we're just going to concentrate on the behavior stuff, but I'm going to share some details towards the end where you can read about some more of our work and how you can get in touch with us and stuff like that. So adaptive learning, just for those of you who don't know what it is, adaptive learning is all about personalizing the learning experience. It's all about letting the students, well, for us at least, it's about putting the students in control of their learning, giving them the information and the tools they need in order to kind of direct their own learning. Doing the same with the instructor, giving them the information and tools they need in order to have a kind of real-time impact with the student. So it's about personalization, it's about choice, it's about control. Everybody learns differently and has different strengths and weaknesses. The original idea behind adaptive learning, as Chuck likes to point out, you can trace its roots all the way back to this model of school learning by John Carroll in 1963. He said that the degree of learning is a function of how much time you spend versus how much time you need. Basically, if you fix the time, so like a semester, then the amount of learning that will happen will vary. On the other hand, if you fix learning, if you say, I want them to learn all of this stuff, then the time needed will vary. You need to give some students more time, some students will have less time. And this is the kind of thing that adaptive learning can help students with, can provide them with the tools and guidance to get there, and provide the instructors with the tools and guidance they need to support the students on that path. And we'll see some of these kind of scenarios playing out in some of the animations I'm going to show you in a minute, where different students can move and progress at different paces, and you'll see different behaviors emerge depending on the different ways students like to learn, and also kind of maybe different external factors that are driving them to learn in one particular way. So I'm going to show you two animations. They're both derived from a couple of courses at the University of Central Florida. All of these slides are available. I'll show you the link at the end. It was up at the start as well. You can interact with these animations directly yourself by going to either of these two links. So let's start off with the first one. So this is a psychology course from UCF. It's a traditional 15-week course. The students had to learn about 200 concepts throughout the course. You can see how much progress they've made here by looking at the y-axis. We've measured how much progress many of these concepts students have learned. Out the x-axis, I'm counting up how much effort they've put in. So it's a simple count of how many lessons did they do. And I've represented each little student as a dot. You can see it's day 0, so everybody's down here, haven't done anything, made no progress, put in no effort yet. So I'm going to replay the course. Students in this course were given all of the content made available to them on day 1. They could go through it as fast or as slow as they liked. They could take full advantage of the adaptive and being in control and accelerate through it, or they could, follow a schedule that kind of fit into their lives and other commitments that they have. So I'm going to replay the course, and we're going to see some of the different behaviors emerge. So very quickly, you see some students shooting out of the blocks and a couple of students racing ahead. And with just less than 3 weeks gone in the course, this 15-week course, we already have some students who are finished. Most students haven't even gone over 25% of the course done yet. You'll see that they're kind of spreading out on the x-axis. Students are putting in different levels of effort to reach the same amount of progress, coming up in just about 3/4 of the way through the course. And you can see the students are quite spread out. Again, spread out in terms of amount of progress and in effort. And we're going to see a rush now at the end of everybody to get finished before the end of the semester. There they all go. So this is a pretty successful course. Most students do finish. We saw that the students didn't all follow the same pathways to get to the finish point. They put in different amounts of effort, and you can see they stopped and started at different times. There was a lot of similarities. A lot of students kind of did travel together in kind of a main group, but there was quite a kind of a spread. And even if they followed kind of similar amounts of effort and similar amounts of progress, they didn't necessarily get there at the same rate. Some worked on multiple days, some might only work once a week. To cover the 200 activities or concepts, you can see that students did roughly on average about 100 to 200 lessons. One of the advantages of an adaptive platform is that it can very quickly determine what a student has already covered previously and not force them to redo it again. So not all of the students had to learn the full 200 concepts from scratch. They knew a lot of the stuff already. We can determine that in a quick pretest, and then the students can focus on where their gaps are. So it makes the learning more efficient and gives them more time to spend on the newer material. To dig into the behaviors a little bit more, what we did was we took the effort and the progress and split them out over time, and that's what you're seeing here on the right-hand side. I'm going to concentrate on progress, which is here at the top. This is where we can see the rate of progress that students made over time. So how quickly or slowly did they move through the materials? When did they take big, long breaks? Or did they do lots of material all in one go? Or did they kind of space it out more evenly? We sorted through these different patterns and came up with kind of 4 prototypes. And we gave them little animal names to make it easier to kind of talk about them. So we have the hare, that's this guy. We can see that the hare is those guys that we saw shoot out of the blocks and get everything done really, really quickly right at the start of the course. So completed the entire 15-week course, covered 200 concepts in less than 3 weeks. We have the tortoise, who, like the tortoise in the story, makes slow, steady progress, logs in every day or two and makes a little bit of progress and kind of inches their way along. And again, completes the whole course before the end, but takes the full 15 weeks. The frog is very similar to the tortoise, but makes slow, steady progress, but logs in once a week or every 10 days. There was 8 kind of modules that they had to get through in this course, and they logged in 15 weeks, so about every 10 days they logged in and did a module's worth of work and made these kind of incremental jumps. So like a frog hopping along. And our final guy, and there was a few of these, is the kangaroo. This student left everything to the very end, didn't do anything, you can see, up until day 80, and then made a small jump, and right at the end completed the whole course in a couple of big jumps. So this is a very high-risk behavior, really cramming everything right down to the last second. If we replay this animation, you'll see how different these behaviors are from each other. So we see the hare race off at the start, and has finished the course before anybody else has even really got started. They've only covered maybe 20 concepts. You can see the tortoise making slow, steady progress, and then once a week or every 10 days, the frog logs in and does a little hop and catches up. Most students in this course are like the hare, or like the tortoise or the frog. They kind of work on a slow and steady, kind of what you kind of expect or recommend to students. We can see that the kangaroo he's just about to get really going, and there he is, right at the end, completes the whole course in a couple of big jumps. These different behaviors, some of them are maybe we would expect, some of them we might not expect. We want to kind of learn more about them. We need to think through, are these good behaviors? Are there some that are surprising to the instructors? Are there some that they might want to lock down? Are there some that they want to encourage? There's a lot we have to kind of think about when we look at these different behaviors. For example, these kangaroos who leave everything to the last moment. Are these guys being just more effective or more efficient with their time? Are they is this a good strategy or a bad strategy? You have to bear in mind this kangaroo is going to break every predictive model that you might build for a course like this. If you were predicting at various stages throughout the course whether somebody was going to pass or fail, the kangaroo, you're going to constantly predict he's going to fail because he never does anything until right at the end. But what's interesting about this guy is that even though everything was crammed in right at the end, he actually did far more in terms of activities than anybody else. He completed about 750 activities across the couple of days, whereas some of these, most of the students were only down around 100 or 200. So he did like 7.5 times, maybe 7 times more work than anybody else. So part of the ongoing research that we're going to have is to think through or to kind of investigate these behaviors in more detail and figure out what kind of ones, what can we learn about them, what's driving them, and what should we do about them? Are some better than others? We've shown this, some of the instructors at both UCF and CTU are rethinking how they manage their courses based off some of these behaviors that we've observed. Some of them they're locking down and they're going to try encourage some others. But it was even just a surprise to some of the instructors to see that these kind of behaviors were happening. Moving on then to a second animation. Now we're going to look at some algebra courses at UCF. So we're going to look at college algebra and intermediate algebra. In UCF, students have to take, I'm sure it's in most institutions, students have to take college algebra to get a maths credit. There is a pre-test that they have to take, and if they don't meet the requirements set by the department in UCF, then they have to first take intermediate algebra. So they have to complete intermediate algebra, and then the following semester they can come back and do college algebra. So that means instead of taking only 1 semester to get their maths credit, it's going to now take 2. This obviously caused issues for the students, and to help kind of get over that, the instructor thought about how they could redesign and integrate these 2 courses together. What she did was she got permission from the university to run these 2 courses concurrently. So she already had college algebra in the Realiza platform. She moved intermediate algebra into it. She would let students start intermediate algebra, students who didn't make the cut for college algebra, and if they made sufficient progress, they could transfer over to college algebra. And if I click play, you're going to see that actually happen. So I'm going to highlight the students that actually made the transition. So we can see here that the courses start off. We can see these guys in blue in intermediate algebra. You can see them kind of separating themselves away from the rest of the group. They're following an accelerated pathway through the content. And they're just about 50 days in. They have, there's quite a gap between them and everybody else who's just about half of the course done. And the rest of the course, these guys have pretty much all of the course done. You notice that in college algebra, they also have about half the course done, but just over 50 days in. So these guys are a good bit behind college algebra. But let's see what actually happens. Let me click play. We can see they start off, and you'll notice that very quickly some of the students catch up, and by the time, and actually that top guy has passed everybody else by, and by the time they're 100 days into the course, they have caught up with everybody else. They followed a much more accelerated pathway, and they're basically indistinguishable from the people who started college algebra from scratch. We can see that the tool allowed them, the adaptive learning experience allowed them to move at a pace that, and gave them the opportunity to move at a pace and learn in a way where they didn't now have to, learn or get their math credit over 2 semesters. They could catch up, they could accelerate, they could learn as quickly as they needed to, achieve the goals that they needed. So it was the platform and the way they kind of built the courses gave them the flexibility. It wasn't just pouring adaptive learning into a particular course, and it was reimagining how the 2 courses kind of interacted with each other. Allowed this to happen, and this is still ongoing at UCF, as far as I'm aware. So there's lots of different behaviors that emerge when we dig deeper, and we've done some kind of more research on finding the full range of behaviors. A lot of the behaviors that we've seen in the animations are quite successful ones, but of course there's a lot of unsuccessful behaviors too. This is a range of behaviors that I pulled out of some of the UCF data across lots of their different courses. We see students who start off, go to sleep, and then come back to life right at the end. We see students, like in this group here, who start too late. They start about 3/4 of the way through the course, and it's just a little too late. We have students who start off fine, but then for some reason just stop. What we want to do, so we've developed methods to be able to automatically identify these behaviors, and what we want to do is try to figure out what's going on with these behaviors, what's driving them, what kind of intervention strategies should we build around them. Are there some behaviors that we should avoid, some that we should encourage? I imagine there are. I imagine some of these behaviors, while they might get you through all the content, are probably pretty poor in terms of retention of knowledge. It's something we want to investigate. I've done some preliminary examinations on how consistent students are with behaviors. One of the great things about working with Colorado Technical University is they use adaptive learning across across all their courses, so for the full 4 years, students are learning through adaptive learning, and we can look at the behaviors of students in different types of courses, and over the years, we see some students who are very consistent. They find a behavior pattern that works for them, and they stick with it, and then other students vary their behaviors a lot. We want to find out what's causing that change. Is it managing workloads in other courses? Is it home life? Is it something personal? Or just, I don't particularly like this subject, so I ended up, procrastinating and leaving everything to the end. So we're going to do more work on investigating some of those. We also want to think through how we do, in terms of students' self-regulation. We've kind of taken the approach of just give the platform to the students and they'll figure out how to use it. But the platform and adaptive learning in general can, give students opportunities that they don't necessarily know exist. So if I go back one slide, maybe these students who started off and never came back, made no further progress, didn't know that they could. Maybe, by telling them that, look, these guys came back to life and managed to do everything right at the end, managed to get everything complete right at the end. Maybe these guys just didn't know that was a possibility. And teaching them and showing them the different ways in which they can now interact and now engage in their learning could be beneficial. Of course, to do that, we first have to figure out which of these behaviors are good and which are bad, or which should we recommend and which shouldn't we. You can read about some of this work and some of the other work that we've done at these links, and all of these are available at this site here, so you can get it at lab.realizeitlearning.com. The slides are available at this particular link here, and if you want to know more about the company and about us, we're going to have a booth at the DLI Symposium in March, so come along and talk to us if you want, or you can look up our website, and my contact details are there as well. So thank you all very much for listening.
Wow, Colin, thank you so much. I wish I had these kind of capabilities when I was a full-time faculty member, being able to use it kind of like radar, see where my students are, as opposed to kind of flying blind. Let me ask a couple questions, and then people can put some things in the chat if they have questions. So when you, the second to the last slide with all the clusters and the charts, did any of the faculty show that during their syllabus review on day one and say, hey, you know, some of you are going to be tortoise and some of you are going to be hare, and kind of give them an idea that this is how it works out if you wait to the end and you're a kangaroo. This is how it works out if you're a frog, etc. Any of that up front shared with students?
Not that I'm aware of. What I have talked to in some institutions where they do use that information to when they're grouping students together for group work. They try not to put like a hare and a kangaroo together, because one wants to do all their work right at the start, one wants to leave everything to the last minute, so they don't work very well together.
How do they know that? How do they know that up front? Who's a kangaroo and who's
Well, this tends to be more in cases where they've had multiple meetings with the students. So somewhere like CTU, where they'll see students multiple times. But no, we haven't had anybody use it in the kind of sense that, at least that I'm aware, where they show the range of behaviors up front and, you know, say, be like this guy, not like this guy. Yeah. But I think that would be pretty. Again, we need to do this study to find out, well, which of the behaviors are effective and which ones aren't. But that is planned. And
have you done, or will you do any studies across many courses? This frog, are they frogs in the next course and the next course? Is that a generalizable behavior, or do they just do it for this course because they know certain things about that up front?
So I've done some initial research on that with the CTU data, because we see students so many times. For some students are very consistent, same behavior every single time. Some students vary a lot, and it was interesting. It seems to be the nursing courses at CTU that vary the most, and I don't know why that is. But you do see that one student, you know, did 10 different courses, 10 different behaviors. I suspect that some of them were, you know, concentrating on the course that had the biggest demand at this particular time, and then, you know, wouldn't be doing much in their other courses, and then would kind of switch back and forth. So they were always active, but, you know, they were doing maybe the hardest course first, or the bit that they preferred the most first, and then leaving some of the other ones.
And you broached this a little bit, but with the folks who, the kangaroos, they tended to give more effort, do more elements of the course than, say, the folks that were the rabbits. Do I have that right?
Yes, yeah.
So any understanding of why they did more elements? Did they need more help, or that's just kind of their personality?
I think it was just their personality. I think the particular person that we highlighted, I think it was just their particular personality. I don't think it's true that every single kangaroo will always do more than everybody else. Right. We're kind of just capturing that they tend to leave everything to the end. But just because you're a kangaroo does not mean that you're kind of not putting in a lot of effort. You're just putting effort in a very different way.
Well, Colin, this has been great. I look forward to seeing you at the Digital Learning Symposium, and I know many of the folks around here are looking forward to chatting with you during the symposium. And again, I wish I had this as a capability, both when I was a student as well as when I was a faculty member. So thank you so much for all you all are doing. So we will put this up on the web next week on the DLI.northcarolina.edu site. Also the handouts that Casey mentioned earlier. And I hope that you'll join us next month. And in between next month, sign up for the Digital Learning Symposium. Again, Friday the 7th is when the early bird registration ends for that. So with that, I'll say adieu. Bye now.